Folk skylder på EU for alt mulig rart. Strømpriser er en ting. En annen ting som EU sies å regulere er hvor mye knekk det skal være i wienerpølser. Norge har valgt å stå utenfor beslutningene som tas i EU-systemet, sist ved folkeavstemning i 1994, da det med knepent flertall ble nei. Men allikevel så ønsker jo Norge og norske interesser å påvirke de beslutningene som skjer i EU, og derfor så har norske myndigheter en stor tilstedeværelse der og påvirker med de midlene de kan. I tillegg så er det mange organisasjoner som jobber med å påvirke dette enorme byråkratiet, som kanskje fremstår litt sånn stort, fremmed og ugjennomtrengelig og rart for folk flest der ute. Og en av de organisasjonene som er der og prøver å påvirke ting, det er også oss, altså Bellona. Bellona er en norsk organisasjon, men vi har også et Bellona-kontor hvor det jobber en god porsjon mennesker faktisk. Og i dag så skal vi snakke med to av de som faktisk jobber der, og høre med dem hva i all verden det er de driver med, og hvordan Brussel i det hele tatt fungerer. Er det noe vits i å være der, og hvordan får man gjennomslag for ting? Vi får se da.
Human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean and the land.
A code red for humanity.
How dare you?
Climate change is here now.
Store nedbørsmengder har ført til flom.
Det må være ærlig.
Global oppvarming er en avgjørende årsak.
FNs nye klimarapport advarer mot menneskeskapte klimaendringer.
Velkommen til Klodebry. Jeg heter Benjamin Strandvåg, og med i studio i dag har jeg to kolleger som jeg vanligvis ikke ser så mye til, annet enn på video. Det er jo fordi, som nevnt, at de jobber i Brussel, og den første jeg skal snakke med, snakker norsk. Så vi kan begynne med å si hei til deg, Lina.
Hei.
Hei, Lina. Lina Strandvåg, Nagell. Du jobber ved Bellonas Brussel-kontor. Med hva da?
Altså, i utgangspunktet så jobber jeg veldig mye med bærekraftig finans og med klimaspørsmål, spesielt tilknyttet økonomi. Men det er jo klart at når man er en mellomstor organisasjon, så får man jo prøvd seg på det fleste.
Riktig. Men det høres komplisert ut. Det høres ut som noe som krever en viss grad av tekniske kunnskaper. Hvordan ender du opp i, altså du kommer fra Rogaland, det hører vi. Hvordan går liksom veien fra Rogaland til Brussel og EU-byråkrati?
Ja, nei, man ble jo kan kanskje ikke helt unngå å bli interessert i energispørsmål når man er fra Rogaland eller veldig nær Stavanger. Ja.
Feil type energi, men energi enda.
Ja, det kan du si. Men det er nå i hvert fall en interesse for spørsmålene da, og dette her med å prøve å finne løsninger på de problemene vi står ovenfor. Så da var jeg i tillegg veldig interessert i internasjonal politikk og hadde en del studieopphold i utlandet som førte meg til Brussel og drive med politisk påvirkningsarbeid der. Og plutselig så fant jeg ut at Bellona hadde kontor. Og da tenkte jeg det var jo ingen bedre mulighet enn å prøve å kombinere alle disse interessene for internasjonal politikk og for energi og klima i en.
Har du noen familiemedlemmer eller noe sånt som jobber i olje også?
Jeg tror på engelsk så sier de sånn I'll plead the fifth. Kan jeg gjøre det?
Ok.
Ja.
Så da skal jeg ikke spørre om hva de synes om at du jobber med fornybar energi og sånn i EU-systemet?
Nei, det er jo klart at jeg tror kanskje ikke fra min familie, de er veldig opptatt av klima de også, men første gangen jeg kom hjem og sa jeg skulle begynne arbeidet for Bellona, så var det jo noen i vennekretsen som hadde noen reaksjoner. Men det ble veldig mange gode samtaler ut av det også, og nå tror jeg vi ser litt mer øye til øye.
Kult. We will have to say hello to the third person in the room. His name is Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Hi. Can you, actually, I've always been curious how to correctly pronounce your last name. So can you just say your full name? Because there's an accent there that I can't really...
Yeah, so it's a Catalan surname.
Yeah.
So it's Marc Preston Aragonès.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's Marc.
But the E is kind of like an E, you know, like a Aragonès.
Yes.
In Catalan it would be Aragonès.
So
in Spanish it's Aragonès.
So your name is more properly pronounced Mark than Mark?
No, it's like an international name, so just pronounce it however you want. Mark.
Okay. So how do you get such a name? Like what are you made up of?
Oh, I'm made up of many constituent parts. But my mom is Catalan, Spanish, and my dad is British. So as a result, I'm a bit of a social mix, cultural mix. And they chose a name which was universally understandable.
And you grew up in France?
Yes.
So that's 3 countries, and now you live in Belgium, so that's a 4th?
Yes.
And your girlfriend is from?
She's also a mix. She's,
Yeah, right. So this is very typical, because I also lived in Brussels for a short while, and this is very typical for people who live and work in Brussels, I feel like. They come from all over the place. They're usually a mix of nationalities. Like, you should have at least 2 passports to live in Brussels, it feels like. And yeah, so why is that the case? Or what is it like to be someone like you? Like, where do you feel like you belong? Do you belong in Brussels now?
Well, it's a funny question, because I do actually feel quite at home in Brussels. So I don't necessarily feel at home when I'm in France or in Spain or in the UK. I like going there, but I'm always the foreigner wherever I go. And in Brussels, I'm just the same as everyone else. As you said, everyone has 2 or 3 passports or nationalities or whatever.
Right.
And it's just nice to go somewhere where you just blend in. You don't have to always explain where you're from. You know, it's just assumes to be normal.
But people listening to you talking who don't know you would just assume that you're British, I guess.
Yes.
But you haven't really actually lived that long in Britain.
No, so I was in the UK for 4 years in Brighton. I studied there. But it's funny that you say that again, because my accent is a bit of a mishmash, like a British mishmash. So if I'm not in the UK, everyone can quite easily tell that I've got something to do with the UK. When I'm in the UK, people are like, "Where the hell are you from?"
Yeah.
So,
but in Brussels, it's okay. I mean, it's encouraged to be a mix of different things, I guess. So,
yeah, absolutely.
That's where you...
But it's also encouraged to be a good English speaker. So in a way, I have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, you do. You're the perfect
And I don't
Brussels
have
resident.
I don't have the stigma of being British, because I'm also Spanish. So I'm still a member of the EU.
But how did you end up there?
Well, when I finished my studies in 2017, I guess.
In Brighton?
In Brighton, yeah, in the UK. I was looking for any relevant job on climate policy, and I was happy to go anywhere.
And you were still in the UK when you were searching?
Yeah, I was in between the UK and home in France, and just sort of looking for anything. And then this perky little NGO in Brussels called Bellona Europa accepted my application.
And at this point, had you ever heard of Bellona?
So I had actually applied for a job 6 months before, but I only realized like maybe a good few weeks after having applied that it was for quite a senior position. And I was still like applying for internships and stuff, so I'm not surprised.
You were
I didn't
how
get it.
old at this point?
I was 21.
Right.
Yeah. So it would have been quite a leap.
And so I guess you needed to look it up, what Bellona is, and what kind of impression, what did you think before you started actually working there?
Well, it's I wasn't particularly sure what it was. I knew that there was a focus on CCS because that was quite prominent on the website.
Okay, halt.
No acronyms.
Whenever we have an acronym,
just carbon capture and storage.
We have to explain what it is.
Yeah, fair enough.
So who wants to have a go?
CCS?
Yeah.
You're working on 10E.
All right. Well, it's carbon capture and storage.
Yeah.
And then do I have to actually explain further? Or?
Yes, please.
All right. So it's, especially on the field that I work on, it's on industrial installations. So you capture the CO2, you transport it, and then you store it.
So we've actually on this podcast before, we've had an episode dedicated to this topic specifically. So this is when you install some amazing technology on a factory or some sort of industrial plant to capture its CO2 emissions, store them in some container or transport it by pipeline, and then store it permanently under the seabed somewhere. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, but broadly, yes. That's it.
And if you want more information, go look up the dedicated CCS episode, if you speak Norwegian, that is. All right, cool. So back to your story.
Yeah, where were we?
You looked up, you understood that Bellona worked on CCS?
Yes, so it was quite prominent on the website that Bellona works on CCS, so carbon capture and storage. And I didn't quite know what type of organization it was. And I guess still today, I mean, it's quite clearly an NGO, but it's not a traditional NGO, I would say. It's not like member-based, and it's a bit more sort of fluid in the way it works. So, I wasn't particularly sure what type of organization it was other than the fact that it was quite clearly working on progressing climate policy. And that was something that was very important for me.
Right. So this is stuff that you sort of, I guess, Googled before you actually started going to the office. And how did your expectations hold up to the reality that actually met you in the office when you started working there? Was it as you expected?
Well, I expected it to be perhaps a bit more corporate. I think that was kind of the image that came off from the perception I had of it.
Shirt and tie type of place?
Yeah, but also in terms of the work streams and the way things worked. But it actually turned out to be very sort of normal NGO vibes, which is good.
What about you, Lina? I guess you had some sort of an idea what was supposed to meet you when you started working there, and how was your first impression with Bellona?
Well, I'm coming from a bit of a different background than Mark, because since I'm Norwegian, I, of course, had heard about Bellona in the past. So I was, I think, maybe impressed about how organized and corporate it was based on kind of my first impression, which maybe was a bit more what Bellona used to be, this activist organization.
Exactly. That was my impression as well.
Yeah.
Because we grew up with an image of a Bellona, a very different Bellona, growing up in Norway. So yeah,
but I think it's clear that it's this balance between the two, and I think my impression was that it was struck quite well, because it's still, it's structured, but in a way where you really get to work together. It's not very hierarchical. I think,
it does feel a little bit like being in Norway without actually being in Norway.
Okay, so, like a little embassy.
Yeah, a little bit,
or an enclave.
A little enclave, I would say, yeah.
Yeah.
Because our boss is Norwegian, so he likes to give us sort of normal Norwegian perks, which is good.
Right.
Obviously not exactly the same, but we like to. He's very nice.
Do you need to learn any like basic Norwegian glossary or?
Not really. To be
I've
honest.
noticed that people write "tuck" to me in the chats.
Yeah, I always do that. I just like saying thank you in whichever language is first in my head.
All right.
But that's tak is not really learning Norwegian. That's just remembering a phrase.
Yeah, I know. But okay, people love to go on city breaks. Norwegians love to hop on a plane and go to Paris or Barcelona or Rome for the weekend. Not many people go to Brussels to have a nice weekend. What kind of place is it?
Well, I think that Brussels is maybe one of those cities that get much better or more interesting the more time you spend there. So of course,
it's not immediately striking or beautiful.
Yeah,
it's pretty grey.
Yeah, it's true, and it rains quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that the architecture is really nice, but I do think that it's really when you spend more time there, when you really start to explore these little nooks, and maybe when you also start to get to know some of the people there, because of course they have this huge international community of people working, with EU policy from all over the world. As Mark said, multiple passports and native tongues and everything. And I think that's when Brussels really comes to life, when you really get into kind of the people and the work and the discussions. And
I mean, as a tourist, you could probably find better places to visit, but I think it's a place that's better to kind of live in than to just go there for a weekend trip.
I kind of find it, seeing it kind of from the outside, I kind of find it an underrated destination though, because it does have a lot of variety, and I guess much of that is owing to the fact that it draws a lot of people from all over the place to come and work there. And so it has a good variety in restaurants and culture and all that stuff. But it's, to me, I usually describe it as like a small working class version of Paris. Would you say that's accurate?
I'm not sure.
Or am I offending Paris?
I mean, I don't think you're offending either city, but
okay.
Yeah,
I think like Brussels is to Paris what Dublin is to London, in a way.
I think
Whatever.
For me, I think I would like to look at Brussels on its own terms, not relative
All
to
right.
Paris.
Okay.
No labels.
But maybe to give it a Brussels and anyone considering visiting there a bit of a shout, don't forget that Brussels is known mostly for three things. It's beer, it's chocolate, and it's fries.
True, that's the most
So
important
if
thing.
you're ever in doubt,
Yeah.
And
I
pink
just have
statues.
I have this very strong need to just label stuff because it's 2021 and I can't handle nuances. I need to put a definite
I told you
definition.
Brussels is grey. It's not black and white.
All right. Good one. So, why is Bellona in Brussels? What are we trying to do there?
well, I think that it's, of course, the reason why Bellona went to Brussels was after the 94 referendum, as you already mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think it is about, being where it's actually happening, where things are going on, where decisions are being made. And if you don't take part in that process, the decisions they're going to happen. You're not going to be a part of them.
We can do, I guess, research and development and do some good things in Norway as well. But for it to make a difference on a larger scale, you need to bring it out to a larger market, scale things up. And I guess that's the idea behind having a Brussels office.
Yeah, I think, Norway has its role to play, and it's an important one as well. But you have to also, acknowledge the role played by the EU. And, you have international level politics, you have EU level politics, you have Norwegian level politics. And I think that you cannot disregard the EU level one. So I think that's why, the Bellona Europa team really, engages actively in these political processes to the European institutions to make sure that, trying to safeguard the climate and climate credibility of the ongoing policy processes.
So I don't think we're going to go into like the specifics of how a decision-making process in the EU bureaucracy works, because that's a whole podcast in itself.
It's not fun either.
Yeah. I wonder we would lose a lot of listeners.
Right. Yeah, Google it if you're interested. But how do you guys work to try to make the world a better place, which I guess is the overarching headline of everything we do?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're working on and what you're trying to achieve.
So can you give an example of something that you're working on?
Well, most recently, something I'm working on is negative emissions. Do I have to explain what that is?
Yes.
Yeah. So negative emissions is when you're taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting it somewhere else where it's not going to go back into the atmosphere for a very, very long time, preferably ever. Or ideally, just never goes back into the atmosphere. It's the opposite of an emission, basically. What's also called carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. But so what I've been working on in Brussels on that topic is all of these net zero targets. They're all based on the assumption that you have to have a balance between how much you're emitting and how much you're removing. So when someone's setting a net zero target, it includes both of these elements, but they never really talk about how much they're relying on the removal bit. So something we had to do in Brussels was make a change in the European climate law, which is like this big framework law to set a net zero target by 2050. And we included
for all the member states of
all the members of the EU, like a EU-wide target, to have a separate target for carbon dioxide removal, so that now we know exactly how much we have to be reducing emissions, not just net zero. It's now like a specific percentage.
Right, this reminds me of the interview that we had with a climate scientist in Oxford, because that's one thing that we sort of forgot to mention here initially, is that not only are we colleagues, but we also drove a car together from Brussels to Glasgow for the UN climate conference back in November. I took a car from Oslo. First leg went down to Brussels, and you joined me from there. And that's when we really got to know each other. But on the way, we had an interview with a climate scientist in Oxford, Miles Allen, and he talked about this, and he talked about the need to define what net zero actually has to mean.
Yeah.
And he explained it very clearly, like, if you are emitting 1 ton of carbon dioxide, then you have to remove 1 ton of carbon dioxide. That is net zero. And don't try to make any sort of arrangement other than that to try to like dilute the fact that that is what needs to happen.
So that's something that we're working on in Brussels. Again, trying to make sure that the accounting is done right, that the reporting is done right, so that you're not actually when you say that you're removing CO2 from the atmosphere, that you're not actually doing something else, which is not at all achieving the same result.
Yeah.
And for that specific thing, we're working very closely with the European Commission, because it wouldn't be that relevant to work with the Parliament or with the Council. But it depends on the political file that you're working on and at what stage of the process it's at. And that really, it's all about following the political process, the normal legislative process, and like striking the right button at the right time.
But how do you go about this? Do you invite important key people out to dinner and buy them drinks and tell them what to say and do in meetings?
No, what we usually do is we have a little envelope and we fill it with loads of cash.
Oh, yeah.
And we just slide it under their desk,
Nice.
No, but, obviously we don't have the resources to do that. If we did, I don't think we'd be having this problem.
But a lot of people do that. That does happen a lot.
And in a way, we're not really lobbyists. We're like counter-lobbyists.
Yeah.
Like, I guess our career exists because there are people who are lobbying to do stuff the wrong way.
Yeah.
And so we're there to try and, bring a bit more of a balanced conversation. And it often means that we have to work a bit harder and with a bit less resources. So it's much more about trying to build the evidence base and then building an interesting narrative that can bring the politicians on board, the political discussion towards where we want it to be.
Let's say you work for somebody very different from us, like, for example, a Russian gas company or a cigarette manufacturer. They're lobbying for something that in the public's eye is at best controversial. And in the case of cigarettes, I don't think anyone's gonna argue that they're beneficial in any way. How do they lobby? Do they get their voices heard in the Brussels sphere, you think? You're nodding?
Yeah, they definitely do get I would say more than their fair share of lobbying representation.
How is that possible?
Well, if you have the resources, you can pretty much get in anywhere you want.
Are they just paying people off, or
I don't think
how does it happen?
They might do, but at least publicly they're not. There's a transparency register, and if you want to go into the European Parliament, you need to have a badge. But there's plenty of other ways to influence in ways that are not transparently sort of listed.
I think that there was actually quite an interesting article in Stavanger Aftenblad about this. I think it might have been at the start of this year or last year, where there was a journalist who went through kind of the lobbyists for the gas sector, from also including Norwegian companies that are present in Brussels, how many meetings they have with policymakers, and also a bit about what finances have been spent on this. And I think if you look at this, what is the problem with, or the reason why we feel like we have to be in Brussels, is because if you have this much pressure on policymakers, you only get one side of the story. So we have to provide that additional side of the story together with many other NGOs, many other industrial actors as well that are very working very hard on this. But I think there's definitely this skewed kind of financial relationship, so that kind of it's the presence and the amount of meetings which makes it seem to policymakers that this is the opinion of the public, because the public in and of itself do not have direct access to the policymakers. It's through these associations and industries, which is able to pay their presence in Brussels, not necessarily pay their influence, but pay the fact that they're there and taking a bigger chunk of the conversation than others.
And also I think the big lobby associations, they get, even if NGOs might be able to get quite a lot of access with the European Commission. So the people working on the specific files, the bureaucrats, the lobby associations get a lot of airtime with the commissioners and with their cabinets, and that obviously has much more weight.
Yeah. And another thing that's kind of funny, I don't know how many people actually know this, but lobbying in Brussels is fairly transparent. You can get a badge to get access to the parliament, but then you need to register as a lobby organization, and you need to make it public who your clients are, who's paying you, basically. But then you do get access, and you can sit in and monitor discussions and talk to people, right? Which is very different from how it happens with the parliament in this country. We don't have that sort of transparency register. It's been debated multiple times, but I don't think it's happening.
But you're pointing to, it is good that there's transparency in the parliament.
Yeah.
In parliament, but it's one of the three institutions.
Yeah.
So at the moment, they have changed the rules recently, but at least until now, what it has been like is you need a badge to go into the European Parliament, but you don't necessarily need to list what you're doing there. And the Commission needs to list all of the meetings that the commissioners have had, but below that, they don't need to list anything. And the European Council, that's really just up to whoever is in charge of the council at that moment. So at the moment, it's the Slovenians.
Slovenia.
So if they so choose, they can be transparent and they can list who they're having meetings with.
Yeah.
But if they don't want to, then there's absolutely no obligation for them to do it. So, it is quite transparent, I guess, if you're comparing to how it is here. But there's still a lot to do.
But now we're making it sound like this is a really shady system that's governing basically a lot of stuff that affects all of Europe. Is it that bad, or is it working as it should, you think?
Well, I mean, it might be by design, but I mean, at the end of the day, these are all democratically elected institutions. The Parliament is directly elected and is quite transparent, and then the European Council is all your governments, except for the Norwegian one, I guess. it's all the governments who are all directly elected in their own country. I don't know how transparency works in each country, but it's not really up to Brussels to decide what's going on in the EU. It's up to the members of the EU to come to Brussels to decide what's going on.
Right. But a common criticism is that Brussels is too far removed from the ordinary person, and is also geographically far away from a lot of places in Europe. And so this is used a lot by the EU membership opponents, or those who want to withdraw their country from the EU. Do they have a point?
I think so. And it's quite a valid criticism that Brussels is a bit far removed from the average citizen. I mean, the amount of people who vote in the European elections is quite small compared to the national elections. I don't really know how to fix that, but it's definitely an issue.
I think also that, presence, geographically, or also becoming more maybe part of the awareness of people, that's also something that I think is very important to try to fix. And I think that it is difficult how to do it, but to also try to make sure that there are specific things going on in different regions and member states, of actually talking about increasing the kind of the EU literacy, also of kind of providing the information about how many processes are happening in the EU, and how much of our kind of, also in Norway, about our legal framework that is influenced by the EU, and how important it is to take part in that process. Because I think it's a two-way, it goes both ways. The EU needs to be better at informing and providing opportunities for engagement, but I think the public also needs to, become a bit more aware and be open to discussing those policies, because again, the decisions are being made. So we need to try to influence them as much as we can.
And there's a bit of a perception issue, because when something goes wrong, it tends to be Brussels' fault.
Yeah.
But when something goes right that Brussels did, the national governments will claim that they did that themselves.
Yes.
So you always get you always get sort of a worse reputation.
Yeah. But how do you feel like the outlook going forward for the case of rescuing the climate, I guess? Is there hope?
Well,
can we make a difference through our presence in the EU?
Yes, and there's definitely hope, and of course we can make a difference, and we know that we are. We're not going to try to play up the role of one organization over many too much, but we do know that we have been successful and are successful on influencing policies, and I think that work we will continue to do. But I do think that there is, we would like, I think, to do so much more if we could.
Can you point to a specific line of text in a piece of legislation and say that I did that? Or how do we see the results of the work that we're doing in Brussels?
Yeah, that we can. Of course, currently there's one process going on, and we're not sure where it's going to swing yet. So we don't know for sure. But I know that there are specific files where this is the case, and of course, then it is a great victory, and you feel that your presence has such meaning. And then on the flip side, there's also quite a lot of those battles, unfortunately, where we are not successful. So then you have to keep on motivating yourself. But yeah, for sure, that does happen.
I was just thinking, what do the people living in Brussels, the actual, what do you call a person from Brussels?
Bruxelles.
Bruxelles? What do the Bruxelles think about all the EU people and institutions that have completely taken over their city? Do they like it?
I think they find us very annoying.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a...
And do you mix it all, or do you stay like two parallel societies?
It is a bit of a sort of different bubbles, kind of. So there's the European bubble, and then there's the sort of Brussels locals artsy bubble.
Yeah.
Which is quite big, surprisingly.
Do you know any people from Brussels?
Yes. Not very many, though.
Nah.
It's taken a while.
And do they work with EU stuff as well?
No.
Okay, so...
very sort of Brussels local stuff.
Actual Brussels
human
people.
beings, yeah. Not bureaucratic drones.
I guess my impression why the EU institutions ended up in Brussels in the first place was because it was a place that nobody cared about. So it wasn't really controversial. The big nations couldn't possibly agree on which one of them to put the institutions in, so they just decided on Belgium that nobody cared about.
You sure it wasn't the fries?
Maybe it was the fries.
Or the beer.
Yeah.
Or the chocolate.
Because French fries are not actually French. They're Belgian. And Belgian people will be very quick to point this out when you say French fries.
Yeah, Flemish fries.
Oh, they're from the Flemish part?
No, I think they're from Wallonia, actually.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Is there something I should have asked you about that I haven't?
Well, on the point about is there a specific piece of text that we can point to? I mentioned earlier the European climate law.
Yeah.
It's not something that Bellona individually can take credit for, because it was a big coalition of NGOs and also academics and other sort of associations calling for the same thing.
Right, and we do cooperate a lot with other...
Exactly. I mean, we're not going to be able to do it on our own. There's no way. But that change that is in the European climate law, Bellona can certainly take some credit for that.
Cool.
So that's nice.
I guess, and that's what it's usually about. I guess in the work, when you're trying to influence stuff, you seek alliances with people you share your interests in a certain case or a certain area. I know that Norwegian authorities they cooperated with other mountainous countries on one occasion to try to influence a directive on tunnels. And how much of an incline or something like that you can have inside a tunnel, because given our geographical features, we need to have tunnels with lots of uphills and downhills. And so I think we partnered with Slovenia and Austria and something like that to try to influence that, and it worked. I guess that's how it works.
But in a way, that's a result of how Norway isn't a member of the EU. Is that it cannot actually directly be involved in those discussions. It has to go through someone else,
right?
Which is not ideal.
We have to leave the room when everybody else gets to vote.
Exactly, but you still have to follow the rules.
Yeah, true. Most of them. We have some exceptions, I guess, in agriculture and fisheries.
Fishing, I think.
And apart from that, we follow all the same rules.
Yeah, that can be at times a little bit frustrating, because you also see this the trying to influence things, especially, for example, in the European Parliament, which I think we haven't spoken so much about yet. We spoke about the Commission and the Council of the countries. But in the Parliament, of course, where you have members who are elected from
Can
each country.
Can we just do a quick rundown on what's the Commission, what's the Parliament, and what's the Council?
Yes. So the Commission, of course, is the kind of the executive body, which is like the government that has been... So that is, for example, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and these things. So the
There's
government...
one commissioner from each country,
Yes.
from each member state. And once they join the commission, they basically become like ministers. And they're supposed to sort of abandon the sort of nationality and become a
European government.
Exactly. Kind of. Go on.
Okay. And then, of course, you have the council, which is put together by the different member states.
So the 27 member states, there used to be 28, of course.
Yeah.
And
are you sad about that, by the way?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
All
right.
Very sad.
Because you got to vote in that.
Yes. Yeah. But my vote counted my dad's vote, so it's net zero.
Oh, yeah, because you voted for different outcomes.
Yes, exactly.
You cancelled each other out.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so the European Council is 27 members, so all the countries are the members of the EU. And for some things relating to tax, for example, they all have to agree, the unanimity. And for some things, such as climate policy, for instance, there's a qualified majority voting, they call it, which is EU jargon for a very specific sort of voting count. So they don't necessarily have to all agree, but obviously it helps if they all agree. So that's the Council, which actually has more of the power. And then there's the European Parliament, which is, as I said, the directly elected, something like 700 MEPs from all the member states. And theoretically, the European Council and the European Parliament they are co-legislators, so they both they should have sort of the same amount of power, but in practice, the Council has more power because of the way the voting works. So in the European Parliament, you just need a majority, whereas in the Council, you need a very specific sort of voting outcome.
And citizens of EU countries vote for representatives for their national government and separately for representatives to the European
Yes,
government.
Different elections.
Right. Yeah. Cool. If you could change something about the EU bureaucracy or how it's working today, what would it be?
Very good question.
You could add something or remove something or just erase everything and start fresh.
Well, I think that there are probably many things, but I think for me, at least as a first step, I would like to kind of make it mandatory to have these kind of public consultation processes when you make legislation. So you actually have to ask for input, which you don't always have to do. We're facing one of those problems now, actually, with, I think it's now become a bit of a buzzword in Norway, this taxonomy, where we're very concerned that, if they wanted to, they wouldn't have to ask us about what they are actually going to, say is green in the future of economic activities. And I think
they want to try to categorize different economic activities as being environmentally friendly or not.
Well, they don't want to categorize if they're not environmentally friendly.
Okay.
They just want to say these are the economic activities you should be focusing on that contributes to sustainability.
Yeah.
And we're awaiting one, it's called a delegated act. I know that's, jargon, but we're awaiting one now, and we are concerned that there's not going to be consultation period.
So there's going to be no arena for you to give your input to what this should look like?
Maybe not, yes.
Okay.
And that is some. And
can they do that? It sounds bad.
It's not mandated that you have to ask for input, and that's what I would like to change. I would like to have a mandated consultation, or as you say in Norwegian, I think it's høringsinnspill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That should apply to all democracies.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think what I would try to change, it's not so much a Brussels thing, but more of a general media thing. It would be good if the Commission, well, not the Commission, but if the sort of the EU functioning got a bit more credit sometimes for some of the stuff it does.
Yeah.
I think that would, if
because the
European,
EU actually does good stuff.
yeah, it does sometimes do really good stuff, surprisingly. But it would just be good if European citizens were a bit more involved, and if they just perceive it as this sort of block that that makes your life a bit less enthusiastic, then it's not really going to be helpful. We need them to be a bit more active and supportive of some of the good stuff that comes out, in the knowledge that sometimes it's helping you against something else that's much less desirable.
If you could be the autocratic ruler of Europe, what would be the first thing that you would do?
Well, I would probably set a very quick deadline for any fossil fuel subsidies. So cutting out a lot of public spending on fossil fuels to try and cut that. I mean, obviously not one day to the next, because that's how you get chaos, but as quickly as is viable.
Mm.
That would be my
first mandate. So you would be
mandate.
that reasonable, even if you had no political opposition? You wouldn't just
I wouldn't try
say,
to wipe,
we're gonna stop that tomorrow. You would actually just set a deadline.
I think because you need to have some sort of transition. It can't really be a massive shock from one day to the next. I mean, that's how
you've just been in Brussels too long.
That's how I get toppled.
Yeah.
I want to get toppled.
Yeah, cool. You don't want to have a coup.
No, exactly.
What about you, Lina?
I would probably go in and try to make sure that unabated gas is not...
unabated gas.
Yeah, so that is like, we talked about CCS.
Yes.
So when you...
The capturing of CO2.
When you don't capture the CO2, that's when it's called unabated gas.
Okay.
Or unabated fossil gas, or natural gas, as some people call it.
All right.
So I would probably go in and try to make sure that we could not invest in fossil gas without CCS and still say that it was contributing to net zero by 2050. And bearing in mind, that doesn't mean that you can't invest in it, but that you couldn't say that that was sustainable.
So the conversation just went a bit technical, but I feel like I need to make some clarification about CCS and negative emissions.
Okay.
Because sometimes there's a lot of confusion between the two, and people assume that CCS is negative emissions, but it's not. Like CCS is when you, as you said earlier, like when you capture the CO2 from the exhaust,
emitting source.
From the, I don't know what it's called, like the tower.
Yeah.
You just capture it before it goes into the atmosphere, and you make sure it doesn't go in the atmosphere. But negative emissions is when you take it out of the atmosphere. So it's different.
Right.
So it'd be like the direct air capture, like a big fan. Just like
so emissions that have already happened.
Yes.
You take them back out of the atmosphere.
Yes.
All right.
And it's obviously much harder to do that. But yeah, I just wanted to make that clarification because it's, very confusing.
One thing that is being discussed a lot on a European level is electromobility. Norway has gotten really far, but Europe is slowly catching up. We did drive an electric car from Brussels to Glasgow, which was, a best case scenario because we were driving one of the longer range cars on the market. It was a Tesla, so it has its own charging network. But we did see quite a few chargers along the way. We saw people with other types of cars trying to charge their cars and other charging networks. Do you feel like Europe is ready for electromobility? And is the EU pushing hard enough for the transition to electromobility?
It's not ready yet. I think there's a lot of work to do.
Because we saw people with like brand new EVs hooking up to a charging station that looked brand new and just couldn't make it work.
It did not work.
Yes.
No, it wasn't their fault. It just did not work.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, there's a lot more work needed on the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is a point that you like to make about how some car manufacturers are exclusively working on electric vehicles. So it's in their interest to have a good network. If they don't, then they're not going to be able to sell their product.
Yeah.
But
Which is basically at this point, that's only Tesla and some Chinese brands.
Yeah.
that only sell EVs. Everybody else is still pushing fossil fuel cars or internal combustion engine vehicles for the most part.
Yeah. And obviously, they're not going to want to phase that out more quickly than they want to.
Yeah.
So they're not really building out the infrastructure that they need.
No.
And as a result, we're getting sort of, I guess, a broken up market for charging infrastructure, where, one manufacturer uses their charging infrastructure, and all the other ones just end up using the pretty bad sort of nationally funded ones.
Yeah.
And, even though the cars are developing very quickly, the infrastructure is lacking a lot.
Yeah. And I guess it's a battle for the raw materials for the batteries and stuff. And the car manufacturers are afraid of a transition to electromobility that's too fast or too quick, and that they will have problems. And so they don't want it to seem too feasible to drive an EV yet. They want to try to make it seem a little bit of a niche thing that's a kind of complicated to use on a daily basis.
And so there's a big discussion in Brussels at the moment about phasing out internal combustion engines. So far what the Commission is proposing is that by 2035, that would be the end of the internal combustion engine in Europe, which we think is a bit too late. We would prefer it to be 2030. And so now there's obviously this discussion between those who want more climate action and those who want more cars, whether that should be 2030 or 2035. But we think that, if you bring it earlier, then that's a clear signal to the market that you're going to have to start building out this infrastructure, start building up your capacities for building batteries, for recycling batteries, for, just running everything, all your land transport on direct electrification.
Okay, guys, I think we're starting to run out of time, but Norway is not a member of the EU. Do you think we should be? I mean, for our own good?
Yeah, I do. I think from my perspective, at least, as a Norwegian who is sometimes frustrated by the fact that I'm working in Brussels and I'm not allowed to vote, for example, in the elections, I do get the sense and a feeling of what we're missing out on. And I think at this point in time, it would be better to become a member.
Right. And do you also think that it's better to, like, if you could envision a Europe without the EU, would that be worse than Europe with EU?
Yes, I think so. Especially because also, as Mark says, now we've been discussing a little bit things we want to improve. But I do think that it's important to highlight all of the incredible work that the EU is doing, especially when it comes to climate policy and climate ambition and targets of reducing emissions. Because I think if we look back, on 2019 when the European Green Deal was launched, and then skip forward to today and seeing also of the ramification it's had for other countries, other big nations such as the United States, China, Russia, who's actually taking important steps on the path to maybe not net zero, but at least on the way there. I think the EU has they're taking a driving seat role in the fight against climate change. So I think that's very important, which I don't think would have happened if each country acted on its own.
And I guess it is being criticized for being a big bureaucracy, but part of the point is for it to replace 27, 28 individual bureaucracies.
Well, actually, you say it's very bureaucratic, but it's actually one of the slimmer sort of institutions. Yeah, in terms
because
of how many people
think
work
it's
there.
very bureaucratic.
And actually, so this summer there was the Fit for 55 package, which is basically a big reform of a lot of EU climate policy, and it was run by the ministry that does climate policy, and there were a lot of reports of the people working there going on burnouts because they're understaffed, and understaffed doing such a massive job.
Right.
They're essentially trying to keep in mind 27 different countries and situations and trying to build a common policy that works for all of them. It's not going to be easy.
And maybe I can also, because I think one of the things that I also hear, which the EU sometimes is maybe not criticized for, but that people bring up, is also, you mentioned the word, the replace. And I think that that's also an important kind of distinction to make because, the EU is an arena where you work together on the topics where you have decided that on these areas we are going to work together. So that doesn't mean that you are, becoming some kind of big, nation,
Super
European
state.
nation state, You still have your own national legislation. You still have areas that are outside. So I think that's also important to mention.
There's a lot of schools of thought on this, on whether the EU should become a super state, whether it should just stay as it is, if it should become less integrated, that kind of stuff. And that was one of the main concerns that Brexiteers had, was that the EU is just slowly going to become a super state.
Yeah.
But if you're a member of it and you don't want that to happen, then it's not going to happen.
Do you think there is anything the EU could do to persuade the British to get back in?
I think so. The deal the UK had was, I think, quite good compared to other EU members. And if it were to join again, it wouldn't have those perks. So I think at this point it's pretty much, at least for a generation or two, not going to happen.
But if they were to suggest something completely radical, like, for example, banning coffee across the continent and only allowing tea.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know how to be a good lobbyist.
Yeah.
That would definitely work.
That would work?
Yeah.
All right. And what in Norway's case, if we wanted to do something similar to attract Norway or appeal to Norwegians and get more people over on the yes side, what could the EU do?
Only Norwegian gas.
Only Norwegian gas, yeah. Cut the cables to Russia.
No interconnectors, just Norwegian gas.
Awesome. Well, I hope you heard that and do whatever
Very serious
necessary.
policy recommendation.
Yeah, serious policy recommendation. And we're going to end on that note. Thank you so much for coming, Lina and Mark. And see you again for a new podcast in a couple of weeks.
Cheers.
Du har hørt Klodebry, en podcast fra Bellona. I hvert program så snakker vi om et eller annet som kan bidra til å redde planeten. Likte du dette? Da bør du følge oss i sosiale medier, og selvfølgelig abonnere på denne podden du sitter og hører på akkurat nå. Jeg heter Benjamin Strandqvist, og denne episoden har blitt til med økonomisk bidrag fra Enova og Rana Gruber. Send oss gjerne spørsmål og kommentarer, klodebry@bellona.no.